welcome. Tonight we'll take a long and gentle journey through time, through silence, through the cradle of civilization. Before the pyramids, before Rome or Greece, there was a land between two rivers, a place where writing was born, where the first laws were written, where humans looked up at the stars and began to wonder. In this video, we'll explore the entire story of ancient Mesopotamia, from the earliest villages of Sumer to the legendary cities of Ur and Babylon, to the myths, gods, kings, and everyday people who shaped the very foundation of human history. This is not a lecture. It's a slow and thoughtful unfolding of the past, designed to soothe your mind, invite you to reflect, and help you drift gently into a state of calm. So settle in, let the noise of the world fade away, and allow the story of Mesopotamia to wash over you like the gentle flow of the Tigris and Euphrates. Long before the towering pyramids of Egypt or the mighty temples of Greece, long before empires carved their names into stone, there was a land cradled by two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This fertile crescent of earth, shaped by time and water, would become the birthplace of something truly profound, civilization itself. Ancient Mesopotamia, a region whose name means between rivers, lies within modern-day Iraq and parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. It was here, thousands of years ago, that humanity made its first bold steps towards society as we know it. At first glance, the land might not seem particularly hospitable. The summers were scorching, the rivers flooded unpredictably, and the soil needed careful tending to yield crops. But in this harshness, there was potential. And it was this potential that drew wandering tribes and early agriculturalists to settle and sow, to build and believe. They came not all at once, but gradually. As generations learned to tame the land, they dug canals to channel the life-giving waters of the rivers, transforming arid plains into rich fields of barley and wheat. They built mud brick homes, clustered together for safety, and from those clusters grew villages, then towns, then cities. Around 4000 BCE, in the southern reaches of Mesopotamia, a people known as the Sumerians began to emerge. They were not the first to farm or build, but they were among the first to write, to organize their society into structured city-states, and to imagine gods who walked among them. In their city of Uruk, the world's first known major city, the Sumerians constructed towering ziggurats, stepped temples rising like mountains above the plains. These were not just places of worship, but symbols of the connection between heaven and earth, the divine and the mundane. As the Sumerians developed, so too did their language, etched into clay tablets with a stylus, forming the earliest known system of writing, cuneiform. These wedge-shaped symbols recorded everything from trade transactions to myths, laws to hymns. With writing came memory, permanence, the ability to look back and learn. It was revolutionary. Humanity could now communicate across generations, not just through word of mouth, but through carefully inscribed words that survived fire, flood, and time. The people of Mesopotamia did not see themselves as separate from nature, but deeply intertwined with it. Their gods were not distant. They were everywhere. In the wind, the rivers, the stars. Anu, the god of the sky. Enlil, the god of air. Inanna, goddess of love and war. Each played a role in a cosmos that seemed both wondrous and terrifying. Life in Mesopotamia was fragile. Floods could erase entire villages. Drought could bring famine. Invaders could sweep across the plains. And yet, they endured. The early Mesopotamians began to build more than just cities. They created a world, one of order and chaos, of gods and kings, of questions and quiet prayers whispered into the wind. In this ancient tapestry, woven from sun-baked clay and star-strewn nights, the first pages of our human story were written. And so, as the Tigris and Euphrates continued their eternal flow, carving paths through the earth and memory alike, the stage was set. Civilization had stirred, and it would never sleep again. As the sun rose over the plains of southern Mesopotamia, its golden light would glint off the walls of cities that had begun to emerge from the dust and riverbanks, cities that would shape the world to come. Among them were names that echoed with ancient power: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, and Nippur. These were the Sumerian city-states, independent political entities ruled by their own kings and priests, each devoted to its patron deity, each locked in a constant dance of rivalry and alliance. Life in these cities was centered around the temple, the ziggurat, which towered above the flatlands like a man-made mountain. Atop these great structures, priests conducted rituals to appease the gods, to ensure the floods came at the right time, to bring fertility to the fields, and to protect the people from misfortune. The temple was not only a place of worship, it was the heart of the city's economy. Temples owned land, stored grain, employed laborers, and directed trade. They were banks, warehouses, and administrative centers all in one. Beneath the gods' watchful eyes, a complex social order began to unfold. At the top were the elites: priests, scribes, and warriors. Below them were the artisans and merchants, skilled workers who crafted goods and engaged in trade that stretched far beyond the boundaries of Sumer. Even lower were the farmers and laborers who toiled endlessly in the fields and canals, sustaining the city with their sweat. And at the bottom, the slaves, prisoners of war or debtors who had lost their freedom but still played a role in this grand machine. Each city-state had its own ruler, often titled Lugal, meaning big man, or Ensai, meaning governor. These leaders were seen as chosen by the gods, intermediaries between the heavens and the earth. Some claimed divine heritage or association with powerful deities to legitimize their rule. Warfare between these cities was frequent, over water rights, boundaries, or simply the thirst for dominance. Armies of spearmen and chariots clashed in the dusty plains, and city walls rose ever higher in response. Uruk, perhaps the most famous of these cities, is remembered not only for its size and influence, but for a legendary king, Gilgamesh. Though much of his story is shrouded in myth, it reflects the concerns and ideals of the Sumerians. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in cuneiform, is considered one of the oldest known works of literature. In it, Gilgamesh seeks immortality, struggles with loss, and wrestles with what it means to be human. Through him, we glimpse the soul of Mesopotamia, a people aware of their mortality, striving to leave a mark that would echo through time. Agriculture remained at the center of Sumerian life. They mastered irrigation, digging canals, dikes, and reservoirs to control the wild rivers. Their agricultural calendar was closely tied to celestial movements, the stars and planets watched carefully by temple astronomers. These early scientists not only tracked the heavens, but laid the groundwork for systems of mathematics and timekeeping. They divided the circle into 360 degrees, the hour into 60 minutes, a legacy that still endures today. As trade grew, so did Sumer's connections to distant lands. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, timber from the Levant, copper from Oman, all found their way into Sumerian markets. In return, Sumerians offered wool, grain, and crafted goods. These exchanges wove Mesopotamia into a wider web of human activity, linking cultures and ideas across vast distances. But with growth came challenges. Cities became crowded, resources strained, and political tensions flared. The unity that Sumerians might have found in shared culture and religion was often undercut by rivalry and ambition. The dream of a united Sumer remained just that, a dream, until a man named Sargon would rise from the shadows of Akkad. In the dust-choked city of Kish, nestled along the Euphrates, a child was born who would alter the course of Mesopotamian history. His name was Sargon, a name that would come to echo across the land like the clang of bronze on stone. Legend tells us he was placed in a reed basket and set adrift on the river, a story that would echo through time in other cultures. Rising from humble origins, Sargon seized power and forged the first true empire in recorded history, the Akkadian Empire. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon overthrew the king of Kish and began a military campaign that would unite the Sumerian city-states under one rule. His conquest stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, from Elam in the east to the Levant in the west. Never before had such a vast and diverse territory been brought under the control of a single ruler. The fragmented mosaic of city-states gave way to something new: imperial unity. Akkad, the capital of this new empire, has never been precisely located, but it is said to have been a city of great splendor. Sargon's administration was efficient and far-reaching. He placed loyal governors in key cities, used Akkadian as the language of administration, and ensured tribute and taxes flowed steadily into his coffers. He established a standing army, a force not just raised in times of war, but kept permanently to enforce his will. The days of local skirmishes were over. Now came the age of campaigns and imperial strategies. The Akkadian language, closely related to later Babylonian and Assyrian tongues, began to replace Sumerian in official contexts. Yet Sumerian culture remained strong. Temples continued to function, scribes still copied sacred texts in cuneiform, and the myths and gods of Sumer remained embedded in daily life. It was a cultural blending, not an erasure. Akkad inherited and extended the Sumerian legacy. Among Sargon's descendants was his grandson Naram-Sin, who proclaimed himself King of the Four Quarters of the World, a bold title asserting dominion over all lands. He even declared himself divine, a living god, breaking a long-standing Mesopotamian tradition of keeping kings separate from the pantheon. His reign was marked by grandeur and also by unrest. Rebellions flared. Distant provinces pushed back. The empire, though mighty, was not invincible. Environmental pressures added to the strain. A prolonged drought gripped the region. Crop yields fell, and people grew desperate. As the rivers dried and canals silted, the lifeblood of Mesopotamia faltered. The once great Akkadian Empire began to unravel, and by the 22nd century BCE, it collapsed under the weight of invasion and internal decay. Among the invaders were the Gudians, tribal peoples from the Zagros Mountains. They swept into the weakened empire, bringing with them chaos and disruption. Though they ruled for a time, their grasp on power was tenuous, and their cultural imprint was faint. The Sumerians, ever resilient, reasserted themselves, and the cities that had given birth to civilization began to stir once more. From the ashes of Akkad rose a new chapter, one not just of revival, but of refinement. The Sumerian Renaissance, as it is often called, saw cities like flourish again. Art, literature, and architecture blossomed, and kings returned to their temples seeking the favor of the gods. In this ebb and flow of empires rising and falling, of language shifting and power evolving, the story of Mesopotamia continued, and always at the center were the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, constant companions to human ambition, winding through the land like threads through ancient fabric. In the quiet that followed the fall of Akkad, as the dust of war settled and the Gudians faded into history, the Sumerian cities began to rise once more. A cultural resurgence began to take root, like shoots of green after a long drought. This period, often referred to as the Sumerian Renaissance, reached its zenith under the leadership of Ur-Nammu, the founder of the third dynasty of Ur, a time of order, law, and architectural marvels. Ur-Nammu came to power around 2112 BCE and established his rule in the city of Ur, one of the oldest and most revered Sumerian cities. With a vision both ambitious and sacred, he declared himself the protector of civilization, chosen by the gods to restore balance after decades of turmoil. His reign marked a turning point, a return to Sumerian traditions, but now infused with the administrative wisdom gained from the Akkadian era. One of Ur-Nammu's most lasting achievements was the construction of the Great Ziggurat of Ur, a massive, terraced temple complex dedicated to Nana, the moon god. Rising high above the city, it symbolized the connection between the heavens and the earth, between humans and the divine. Built with baked mud bricks and carefully engineered, it stood as a testament to the architectural and spiritual aspirations of its people. But Ur-Nammu was not only a builder, he was also a lawgiver. He created one of the earliest known legal codes, predating even the famous Code of Hammurabi. Written in Sumerian and etched into clay tablets, the Code of Ur-Nammu laid out laws and punishments for various crimes, striving for justice and social order. It reflected a society that valued fairness, even as it was deeply hierarchical. His son Shulgi succeeded him and ruled for nearly half a century. Shulgi continued his father's legacy with remarkable vigor. He standardized weights and measures, expanded the road system, and promoted education by supporting scribal schools. Under his rule, the Sumerian language and culture flourished, even as the political structure of Mesopotamia grew more complex. The third dynasty of Ur was highly centralized. Bureaucrats meticulously recorded taxes, harvests, labor, and trade. Administrative tablets from this period reveal an astonishing level of detail and control, from the distribution of grain to the provisioning of temple workers. It was a well-oiled machine, a civilization at its peak. Yet this golden age, like all others, was not destined to last forever. As the dynasty expanded its reach, it faced growing resistance from the peripheries. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people from the western deserts, began to migrate into Mesopotamia. Though initially absorbed into society, their numbers grew, and so did their influence. Simultaneously, Elamites from the east eyed the wealth of Ur and prepared to strike. Around 2004 BCE, the city of Ur fell to Elamite forces. Its temples were plundered, its ziggurats silenced, and the Sumerian dream began to fade. The third dynasty of Ur collapsed, marking the end of Sumerian political dominance. Yet the echoes of their accomplishments would continue, carried forward by those who came after. Though the Sumerian language would gradually be replaced by Akkadian in everyday use, it remained sacred, the language of priests, scholars, and scribes. Their myths, poems, and laws would be preserved and adapted by future civilizations, never fully forgotten. And so, with the setting of the Sumerian sun, a new dawn approached, a time when city-states once more jostled for power, and one of them, Babylon, would rise to claim a place in the stars of history. In the shifting sands of Mesopotamian history, after the fall of Ur, a new power began to stir in the heart of the land. Babylon. Located along the banks of the Euphrates, Babylon started as a modest town, overshadowed by more prominent cities. But under the leadership of a determined dynasty, it grew steadily. And in time, it would become the center of an empire and a symbol of human ambition. The most famous of Babylon's early kings was Hammurabi, who came to power around 1792 BCE. Wise, strategic, and deeply committed to justice, Hammurabi inherited a kingdom surrounded by rivals. But through a blend of military might, diplomacy, and careful alliances, he expanded Babylon's control across Mesopotamia. By the end of his reign, he had unified most of the region under his authority, forging what historians often call the First Babylonian Empire. Hammurabi is best remembered for his legal code, a comprehensive collection of laws inscribed on a tall, black stele of diorite. The Code of Hammurabi stands as one of the most complete surviving legal documents from the ancient world. Its famous opening invokes the gods, declaring that Hammurabi was chosen by the divine to bring justice and order to the land. The laws cover a wide range of subjects: property, trade, marriage, theft, and even medical malpractice. The principle of an eye for an eye is perhaps the most well-known aspect of Hammurabi's code, but the laws also reflect a deep concern for fairness, especially among the social classes. Though penalties varied depending on status: freemen, commoners, slaves, the structure of the code emphasized accountability and the responsibilities of both rulers and citizens. It showed a society deeply invested in law and structure. Under Hammurabi, Babylon became not just a political center, but also a cultural and religious one. Temples were restored and expanded, canals repaired, and festivals established to honor the gods. Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, rose to prominence, gradually becoming the head of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Stories of creation were rewritten to place Marduk at the center, reshaping theology to match political reality. The city of Babylon itself began to grow in splendor. Though the grand structures of later periods had yet to be built, the foundations were laid. Markets bustled, scribes filled tablets with laws and trade agreements, and scholars gazed at the stars from temple rooftops. The Babylonians, like the Sumerians before them, were keen observers of the heavens. They mapped constellations, tracked the movements of planets, and developed mathematical systems that would influence generations to come. After Hammurabi's death, however, the empire began to fracture. His successors struggled to maintain the vast territories he had conquered. Internal dissent, economic challenges, and pressure from external tribes weakened the state's grip. By the 16th century BCE, Babylon had fallen to the Hittites, who plundered the city and left a power vacuum in their wake. But the name Babylon would not vanish. Though subdued, the city remained important, a cultural beacon in the region, waiting for its moment to rise again. And indeed, centuries later, it would do just that, under rulers whose ambitions reached beyond the earth and into the heavens. In the wake of Babylon's fall to the Hittites, a foreign group known as the Kassites took control of the region. Originating from the Zagros Mountains to the northeast, the Kassites were outsiders. And yet, they would rule Babylon for nearly 4 centuries. During their long tenure from around 1595 to 1155 BCE, Babylon remained politically stable, if not as militarily aggressive as in Hammurabi's time. The Kassites adopted much of the local culture. They revered Marduk, maintained temples, preserved Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, and used cuneiform writing. Though the Kassite kings had their own customs and language, they largely blended into the Mesopotamian way of life. Their rule was characterized more by continuity than conquest. One of the more intriguing aspects of the Kassite period was the increased importance of diplomacy. Mesopotamia was now part of a wider world that included the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, and the Mitanni. Clay tablets discovered at Amarna in Egypt reveal letters exchanged between Babylonian kings and pharaohs. Marriages were arranged, gifts exchanged, and alliances negotiated. It was a time of royal correspondence and international awareness. Despite its long duration, the Kassite period remains somewhat shadowy. Few monumental inscriptions or grand temples survive, but administrative records and legal documents show a functioning and orderly society, one that managed land, agriculture, and trade effectively. The Kassites introduced innovations like the kuduru, a type of stone boundary marker that recorded land grants and legal decisions, often accompanied by divine curses for those who would violate the agreements. As time passed, however, the Kassite grip began to weaken. Internal revolts, economic decline, and external invasions took their toll. The Elamites, from what is now southwestern Iran, emerged as a significant threat. In the 12th century BCE, they sacked Babylon, looted its temples, and took prized statues, including the idol of Marduk, back to Elam as trophies. This blow deeply affected Babylonian identity. The loss of Marduk's statue was more than symbolic, it was a spiritual crisis. But even in despair, the Babylonians endured. They would rise again, reclaim their gods, and rebuild their shattered world. Meanwhile, in the north, a new power was growing, one that would not just inherit the Mesopotamian legacy, but reshape it through conquest and empire. While Babylon flourished and faltered in the south, the city of Ashur in the north had been steadily growing in strength. From a trading post on the banks of the Tigris, it evolved into the capital of a burgeoning kingdom, one that would in time become the mighty Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians, though culturally linked to their southern neighbors, developed a distinct identity, one built on discipline, resilience, and military prowess. Early Assyrian kings were primarily traders and administrators. They expanded their influence through commerce, especially in tin, textiles, and other valuable goods. Over time, however, the Assyrians turned increasingly to warfare to secure their interests and expand their territories. By the 14th century BCE, under rulers like Ashurbanipal I, Assyria began to challenge Babylonian supremacy and assert its independence. The Assyrians believed deeply in their god Ashur, whom they saw as both a divine protector and a guide in war. Their kings ruled in his name, not merely as representatives, but as earthly instruments of his will. This belief gave their military campaigns a sense of religious duty. To fight was to serve the god. To conquer was to fulfill a sacred mission. Assyrian armies were among the most advanced of their time. They used iron weapons, organized their soldiers into specialized units, and employed siege engines to break city walls. They were known for their ruthlessness, but also for their discipline and effectiveness. Cities that resisted could expect harsh punishment, but those that submitted were often integrated into the empire's efficient administrative system. Through conquest, the Assyrians amassed a wealth of knowledge and culture. They absorbed the writings of Sumer and Akkad, preserved Babylonian myths, and built grand palaces decorated with reliefs depicting battles, hunts, and divine encounters. They founded cities like Nineveh and Kalhu, centers of art, learning, and power. By the time of Tiglath-Pileser III in the 8th century BCE, Assyria had become a true empire. Its influence stretched across the Levant into Anatolia and deep into Mesopotamia. Roads were built to connect distant provinces, and governors were appointed to oversee the administration of conquered lands. Tribute flowed into the heart of the empire, feeding its ambitions and fueling further expansion. And yet, even as the Assyrian Empire reached for greatness, shadows loomed on the horizon. For every rise in Mesopotamia, there would be a fall. The land between the rivers had seen countless dynasties come and go, each believing their power eternal, each ultimately humbled by time. The Assyrian Empire reached its zenith in the 7th century BCE under rulers like Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal. Their capitals, especially Nineveh, became centers of astonishing wealth and sophistication. Ashurbanipal, in particular, was a scholar king who collected thousands of texts from across Mesopotamia, preserving the wisdom of ages in the vast library of Nineveh. Clay tablets filled with cuneiform script told tales of gods and kings, mathematics and medicine, rituals and dreams. Yet, as with all empires that stretch too far, the seams began to strain. The vast territories were difficult to control. Rebellions flared in Egypt and Babylon. Enemies, once subdued, found common cause. The Medes from the Iranian plateau and the Babylonians under Nabopolassar formed a powerful alliance. Together they marched on the heart of the empire. In 612 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Nineveh fell. The city burned. Its walls breached. Its palaces looted. The Assyrian dream ended not with a whisper, but with a thunderous crash. The empire crumbled, and the torch of Mesopotamian leadership passed once more to Babylon, reborn and resplendent. And in this next chapter, under the gaze of mighty rulers and the silent stars, Babylon would rise to heights it had never known before. The fall of Assyria was not the end. It was the prelude to a golden revival. Out of the ashes of Nineveh, a new Babylonian kingdom rose, led by Nabopolassar and more famously by his son Nebuchadnezzar II. This era, known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire, would restore the glory of Babylon and leave behind monuments that would dazzle the world. Nebuchadnezzar II reigned from 605 to 562 BCE and is remembered not only for his military prowess, but also for his grand architectural projects. He expanded the city of Babylon into one of the most magnificent metropolises of the ancient world. Towering walls, majestic gates, and sprawling temples reshaped the urban landscape. Among his most famous constructions was the Ishtar Gate, adorned with glazed blue bricks and reliefs of dragons and bulls, a dazzling entrance to the inner city. Legend tells of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar for his Median queen, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. Though their existence remains debated, ancient writers describe them as an engineering marvelous, terraces with waterfalls, and exotic plants rising above the plains. Whether myth or reality, the story speaks to the wonder Babylon inspired in all who saw or imagined it. Nebuchadnezzar's reign also involved significant military campaigns. He waged war in the Levant, subduing rebellious cities and eventually besieging Jerusalem. The destruction of the First Temple and the Babylonian captivity of the Jewish people became pivotal events in biblical history, deeply tied to Nebuchadnezzar's legacy. Within the city, life was vibrant. Scholars recorded astronomical data with increasing precision, observing planetary movements and eclipses. Priests oversaw rituals that linked the heavens with the fate of kings. Commerce flowed through the markets. Spices from Arabia, gold from Egypt, textiles from Anatolia. Babylon was no longer just a city, it was the beating heart of a cultural world. But Babylon's brilliance also attracted envy. To the east, a new power was growing, one forged by nomads and hardened by battle the Persians. In 539 BCE, under Cyrus the Great, the Persian army entered Babylon. According to tradition, the city fell without a fight, the gates opened by disaffected priests or commanders. Cyrus presented himself not as a conqueror, but a liberator. He restored temples, allowed exiled peoples to return home, and respected local traditions. With the coming of Persia, Mesopotamia entered a new phase. The old gods remained, the temples still stood, but the center of power had shifted. No longer would Babylon rule the world. Yet its legacy was far from forgotten. The myths, the laws, the writings, all lived on, copied by scribes, studied by scholars, and whispered in the corridors of future empires. Even in decline, Mesopotamia continued to shape the course of civilization. Its rivers still ran, its ziggurats still reached toward the sky, and its influence echoed through time like a soft drumbeat beneath the surface of history. When Cyrus the Great entered Babylon in 539 BCE, he did so not with destruction, but with reverence. The city's temples were spared, its priests respected, and its customs largely preserved. The Persians, under the Achaemenid dynasty, brought with them a new model of governance zone that allowed local traditions to flourish under a broader imperial framework. And so, Mesopotamia entered a period of relative peace and continuity, woven into a vast empire that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. Cyrus declared himself a restorer of divine order. In the famous Cyrus Cylinder, often considered the world's first charter of human rights, she described his rule as one of justice and piety. He claimed to have been chosen by Marduk himself to restore Babylon's greatness. For the priests and people of the city, this approach was deeply reassuring. Their gods had not been overthrown, merely joined by a new divine will. Under Persian rule, Babylon became one of the four major capitals of the empire, alongside Susa, Ecbatana, and Persepolis. The city retained its administrative importance and remained a hub of economic and intellectual activity. Governors known as satraps oversaw provinces, collecting taxes, maintaining order, and ensuring the smooth operation of trade and law. The famed royal road connected Mesopotamia to distant lands, allowing messages and messengers to cross the empire with surprising speed. Persian kings, especially Darius the Great, continued to build upon the foundations laid by Babylonian and Assyrian predecessors. Temples were maintained, irrigation systems repaired, and records kept in the familiar cuneiform script. Though the official language of administration shifted to Aramaic, Sumerian and Akkadian were still used in scholarly and religious contexts. Astronomy and mathematics advanced during this period. Babylonian astronomers compiled detailed star charts, tracked lunar and solar cycles, and developed predictive models of planetary motion. Their understanding of the heavens laid the groundwork for later Greek and Islamic astronomers. In their observatories, high atop ziggurats, they gazed at the stars not only to understand the cosmos, but to divine the will of the gods. Religious life remained vibrant. Marduk's temple, the great Esagila, continued to be the spiritual heart of the city. Rituals were performed, hymns recited, and offerings made. The sacred procession during the New Year festival, Akhet, remained a powerful public event, drawing citizens from across the region. Even as foreign kings ruled from afar, the rhythms of Mesopotamian spiritual life remained unchanged. Yet beneath the surface, change was brewing. Some locals resented Persian rule, longing for a return to independence and past glories. Rebellions occasionally flared, though they were swiftly suppressed. Babylon never again achieved its former dominance, but it retained its dignity, a jewel in the crown of the Achaemenid realm. In 331 BCE, that crown was shattered. A young Macedonian king, Alexander the Great, marched into Mesopotamia. At the Battle of Gaugamela, he defeated Darius III, and soon after entered Babylon as a conqueror. The people, weary of distant kings and seduced by Alexander's charm, welcomed him. He made offerings to Marduk, honored the temples, and declared his admiration for Babylon's legacy. He even dreamed of making the city his eastern capital. But fate had other plans. Within a few years, Alexander was dead. His empire fractured, his dreams unfinished. And yet, his presence marked another turning point for Mesopotamia. The Greeks had arrived, and with them came a new fusion of cultures, a Hellenistic world where East met West. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented like shattered pottery, each shard seized by one of his ambitious generals. Mesopotamia, including the prized city of Babylon, fell into the hands of Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander's most capable lieutenants. From this transition emerged the Seleucid Empire, a fusion of Greek governance and Eastern tradition that would reshape the cultural landscape of the ancient Near East. Seleucus initially ruled from Babylon, but soon founded a new city, Seleucia, on the Tigris, which would grow to rival Babylon in population and importance. Strategically located and built in the Greek style, Seleucia became a symbol of the Hellenistic world's blending of ideas. Markets bustled with traders speaking Greek, Aramaic, and remnants of Akkadian. And the city's design, with its grid-like streets and grand public buildings, echoed the aesthetics of Athens and Alexandria. Still, Babylon lingered like an old song in the hearts of the people. Temples like Esagila were maintained, and priests continued their rituals, though now under Greek oversight. Cuneiform tablets still recorded economic transactions and astronomical data, but with each passing generation, the ancient script faded from daily use. Greek became the language of power and learning, while the once sacred Sumerian slipped into silence. Astronomy, however, remained a powerful bridge between the cultures. Babylonian astronomer Snow, working under Greek patrons, continued to observe the skies with meticulous care. Their lunar and planetary theories influenced Greek thinkers, especially those in Alexandria. The fusion of Babylonian data with Greek philosophy laid the groundwork for future astronomical revolutions. Daily life in Mesopotamia under Hellenistic rule was marked by complexity. Greek settlers mingled with native populations, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes with tension. Local gods were reinterpreted through Greek lenses. Marduk was likened to Zeus, Ishtar to Aphrodite. In this syncretic environment, temples displayed Greek columns alongside traditional Mesopotamian motifs. Old myths were retold, their characters wearing new names, but carrying familiar themes of fate. divine conflict, and cosmic order. Economically, the region remained vital. Agriculture flourished along the canals of the Euphrates and Tigris. Trade routes carried goods from India and Persia through Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, and cities like Seleucia, Ctesiphon, and Babylon remained hubs of exchange and diplomacy. Yet the balance was delicate. Revolts flared now and then, fueled by local dissatisfaction or dynastic struggles within the Seleucid realm. As centuries passed, new powers rose on the fringes of the Greek world. The Parthian skilled horsemen from Iran began to push westward. In time, they would sweep into Mesopotamia and challenge the Seleucid grip. The Greeks, for all their philosophy and architecture, had failed to fully root themselves in the soul of the land. The people remembered their own gods, their own myths, and they welcomed new rulers who might let the old ways breathe once more. When the Parthians took control in the 2nd century BCE, they did not erase what came before. Instead, they layered themselves atop it, adopting many local customs, even as they brought new elements from the Iranian plateau. A new chapter had begun, one where East truly met West, where empires no longer simply conquered, but blended, transforming the cradle of civilization into a crossroads of worlds. Mesopotamia endured, as it always had, not by resisting change, but by absorbing it, preserving its essence within the very currents that sought to reshape it. And even as the stars above moved in their eternal dance, the people of the rivers still looked skyward, searching for meaning among the constellations drawn by those who came long before. With the decline of Seleucid authority, the Parthians emerged as the new guardians of Mesopotamia. By the mid-2nd century BCE, these formidable horsemen from the northeast had captured key territories, including Babylon and Seleucia. Their rise marked the beginning of a long era in which Mesopotamia was no longer under Hellenistic dominion, but part of a broader Iranian cultural sphere, a region now balanced between old traditions and new imperial rhythms. The Parthian Empire, ruled by the Arsacid dynasty, was less centralized than the empires before it. Power was shared among noble families, and governance varied across regions. In Mesopotamia, this meant that local elites, priests, merchants, and scholars retained significant autonomy. Temples continued to function. Cuneiform was still used, particularly in religious texts, and ancient deities still received offerings in dimly lit sanctuaries. Yet, the changes were evident. Greek cities like Seleucia now existed alongside older Mesopotamian centers and newer Parthian outposts. Zoroastrian elements slowly seeped into the spiritual atmosphere, although the Parthians were generally tolerant of local religions. Fire temples stood not far from ziggurats, and rituals once reserved for Marduk now shared space with those devoted to Ahura Mazda. Trade thrived under Parthian rule. The empire sat along the Silk Road, a vital artery connecting China to the Mediterranean. Caravans passed through Mesopotamia, bringing silk, spices, and precious stones from the east, and carrying Roman glassware, wines, and gold back in return. The cities along the Tigris and Euphrates benefited immensely from this exchange, becoming cosmopolitan centers where languages mingled and cultures met. Ctesiphon, located on the eastern bank of the Tigris near Seleucia, rose to prominence as the Parthian capital. Though less architecturally grand than some of its predecessors, Ctesiphon held political and symbolic weight. It represented the shifting axis of power, a city at the crossroads of East and West, where Persian nobility, Greek artisans, and Semitic scribes could all be found. In rural areas, life changed more slowly. Farmers still relied on irrigation canals first dug millennia earlier. The same sun scorched the fields, and the same stars guided planting seasons. The rhythms of nature and tradition were resilient. Families passed down stories of Gilgamesh and Ishtar, their meanings evolving with time, but never disappearing entirely. However, the Parthian Empire was not immune to instability. Its decentralized structure, while flexible, made it vulnerable to internal disputes. Over time, conflicts between noble houses weakened central authority. In the West, Roman pressure increased. The two great powers clashed repeatedly over control of Mesopotamia, with cities like Dura Europos and Hatra caught in the tides of war. These conflicts left scars. Some cities were sacked, others changed hands multiple times. Yet Mesopotamia, ever the survivor, adapted. With each new ruler, the old roots remained. Whether under Parthian, Greek, or Assyrian kings, the people of the rivers adjusted to the wind's direction, yet never forgot the soil beneath their feet. As the Parthians faded, another Persian dynasty was waiting in the wings. The Sasanian Empire, rising in the 3rd century CE, would once again reshape the land between the rivers. It would revive Persian ideals with a renewed vigor, bringing with it both glory and challenge. For Mesopotamia, it would be yet another transformation in a long journey marked by endurance, reinvention, and quiet strength. With the fall of the Parthians in the early 3rd century CE, the Sasanian Empire emerged as the dominant power in Mesopotamia. Ardashir I, founder of the dynasty, claimed descent from ancient Persian kings and sought to revive the glory of the Achaemenids. His successors expanded the empire's reach and established a strong, centralized state. For Mesopotamia, this meant a renewed Persian presence, but also a deep and deliberate cultural transformation. The Sasanians, unlike the more decentralized Parthians, emphasized unity of administration, religion, and identity. They made Ctesiphon their imperial capital, transforming it into a grand city with palaces, courts, and gardens. The massive arch of the Ta Khasra, still standing in ruins today, is a relic of this age, a monumental reminder of imperial ambition. The court at Ctesiphon attracted poets, scholars, and diplomats from across the known world. Zoroastrianism became the state religion, with fire temples and priests playing an increasingly central role. Other faiths, such as Judaism, Christianity, and various local cults were tolerated at times, but often subjected to periods of control or persecution. Babylonian temples that had once honored Marduk were now largely silent, their rituals remembered by only a few scholars. Cuneiform writing finally slipped into extinction, replaced by Aramaic scripts and Middle Persian inscriptions. And yet, Mesopotamia remained intellectually alive. The city of Gundashapur, though in nearby Khuzestan, became a renowned center of learning during the Sasanian period. It drew from Greek, Indian, and Persian traditions, cultivating studies in medicine, philosophy, and astronomy. The knowledge first gathered on clay tablets found a new home in parchment scrolls and oral traditions. The Sasanians maintained the region's infrastructure, repairing canals and supporting agriculture. Trade continued to flow along established routes. Farmers, merchants, and artisans adapted, as they always had, to the changing tides of empire. The past was never truly gone, only buried beneath new layers of governance and belief. But the Sasanian world was under constant pressure. To the west, Romano-Christian and imperial pressed against its borders. In the east, nomadic tribes grew restless. And within, sectarian and social tensions simmered. For all its splendor, The Sasanian order stood on a precipice, and in the 7th century, the storm would finally come. Baghdad, the round city, stood as the jewel of the Islamic world. Built with purpose and grandeur, its circular design reflected cosmic harmony, with the caliph's palace at its center, radiating power and order. The Tigris flowed nearby, sustaining life and trade, just as it had for millennia. Here, in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, the future of science, philosophy, and art was being forged. Under the Abbasid caliphs especially, Harun al-Rashid and his son al-Mamun Baghdad flourished. The city attracted scholars from across the Islamic world and beyond. Greek texts were translated into Arabic and then expanded upon. Medicine advanced, with hospitals offering treatments based on both observation and ancient texts. Mathematicians introduced algebra, a term derived from al-Jabr, part of the title of a treatise written by al-Khwarizmi. Astronomers continued to observe the skies, building upon Babylonian methods while applying new instruments and theories. They named stars, charted planetary paths, and attempted to measure the size of the Earth. The Mesopotamian tradition of stargazing had not evolved, now framed by the words of the Quran and the tools of Greek logic. The arts also flourished. Poets penned verses inspired by the rhythms of the rivers and the echoes of ancient myths. Calligraphers adorned manuscripts with flowing Arabic script, turning words into visual beauty. Architects blended Persian, Roman, and local styles to create mosques, gardens, and palaces that reflected a world at peace with both faith and reason. Trade connected Baghdad to the wider world. Caravans arrived from India, China, Africa, and Europe, bringing goods, ideas, and people. The city became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and beliefs. It was not just a capital, it was a crossroads, a living testament to the power of synthesis and curiosity. But golden ages are fragile. Political rivalries, succession crises, and economic strains began to weigh on the Abbasid state. As caliphs grew more secluded and power shifted to military elites, the foundations began to crack. And from the steppes of Central Asia, a new threat was on the horizon that would bring fire, fear, and a terrible silence. In the early 7th century, a new force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula, one that would forever change the course of Mesopotamian history. The Islamic conquests, led by the successors of the Prophet Muhammad, swept across the Middle East with remarkable speed. In 637 CE, at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, Muslim forces defeated the Sasanians and opened the gates to Mesopotamia. Ctesiphon, the ancient capital of empires, fell. Its treasures were seized, its palaces left to the winds of time. But this was not merely a military conquest, it was the beginning of a profound cultural and religious transformation. The new rulers brought with them not just a faith, but a new language Arabic and a new administrative framework. Islam spread quickly through the region. Zoroastrianism, though still practiced, began to wane. Christianity and Judaism persisted, often as protected communities, but political power now lay firmly in the hands of the caliphate. Mosques were built where temples once stood, and Arabic inscriptions replaced Persian and Aramaic. The Quran became the central text, recited in markets, studied in schools, and etched into the very identity of the land. Yet the Islamic world, especially under the Abbasid Caliphate, did not erase the past, it absorbed it. The Abbasid capital of Baghdad, founded in 762 CE, just north of ancient Babylon, became a beacon of learning and culture. Scholars there translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. They preserved and built upon the astronomical and mathematical insights first developed by the Sumerians and Babylonians. Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gives us the word algorithm, studied in Baghdad, working with knowledge that traced its roots back thousands of years. Baghdad blossomed with poets, physicians, philosophers, and scientists. The House of Wisdom, a great library and center of learning, echoed with debate and discovery. Mesopotamia had once more become the intellectual heart of the world, not through conquest alone, but through curiosity, dialogue, and reverence for the wisdom of the ancients. In 1258 CE, the unthinkable happened. Baghdad, the glorious capital of learning, the city of 1,000 scholars, fell to the Mongols. Led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongol army surrounded the city. Their siege was brutal, and when the walls fell, the destruction was nearly total. The caliph was executed. The libraries filled with irreplaceable manuscripts were thrown into the river, turning the Tigris black with ink. Mosques, schools, hospitals, all were destroyed. The House of Wisdom, symbol of centuries of knowledge, was lost. Survivors spoke of fire and blood, of screams echoing through empty streets, of a city brought low by unrelenting fury. It marked the end of an era. The Islamic Golden Age, already in decline, was dealt a mortal blow. The center of the Muslim world shifted westward to Cairo, Fez, and later Istanbul. Mesopotamia, once again, became a shadow of its former self, still inhabited, still vital, but no longer the beacon it had been for so long. And yet, even in ruin, the memory endured, even as empires rose and fell, as languages changed and religions shifted. The soul of Mesopotamia persisted, in broken ziggurats and buried tablets, in the whispers of ancient names, in the stars that still traced familiar paths across the night sky. The story lived on. Long after the roar of empires had quieted, and the great cities of Mesopotamia lay in ruin, covered by centuries of sand and silence, the legacy of the land between two rivers remained alive, buried beneath the earth, waiting. The ziggurats no longer reached for the sky. The libraries no longer echoed with the scratching of styluses. But beneath the dust, the stories endured. It would take thousands of years for the world to truly remember Mesopotamia, to uncover its wonders, and rediscover the roots of civilization itself. During the centuries following the Mongol invasion, Mesopotamia came under the control of various Islamic dynasties, eventually becoming part of the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century. The ancient cities remained mostly unexcavated and often forgotten, their names whispered only in religious texts or tales handed down by local tribes. The grand ruins of Babylon, Uruk, and Nineveh became mysterious mounds dotting the plains, known to the Bedouins, but unexplored by scholars. It wasn't until the 19th century that Western explorers and archaeologists began to turn their eyes toward Iraq, motivated by curiosity, faith, and a desire to trace the origins of biblical stories. These early adventurers set out with little more than shovels, notebooks, and dreams. What they found beneath the earth astonished them. At the site of Nineveh, the British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard uncovered the remains of Assyrian palaces. Walls covered with carved reliefs depicting kings, lions, battles, and divine visions. In a buried chamber, he discovered the library of Ashurbanipal, over 30,000 clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform. Among them was a tale that would change the way the world viewed literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story written over 4,000 years ago, echoing with themes of friendship, loss, and the search for meaning. Other excavations followed. At Ur, Sir Leonard Woolley unearthed a vast royal cemetery, filled with gold, lapis lazuli, and mysterious lyres adorned with bulls' heads. He also uncovered the towering remains of a ziggurat, once dedicated to the moon god Nana. These discoveries painted a vivid picture of Sumerian society, its sophistication, artistry, and deep spirituality. At Babylon, archaeologists traced the walls, gates, and foundations of the ancient capital, confirming its grandeur and complexity. But the excitement of discovery was matched by the challenge of interpretation. Cuneiform had to be deciphered, an achievement accomplished in the mid-19th century, thanks to scholars like Henry Rawlinson, who studied inscriptions on the Behistun rock in Iran. By comparing the Babylonian, Elamite, and Old Persian texts, he cracked the code, allowing modern readers to finally hear the voices of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. As translations emerged, the world was stunned. Myths of floods, creation, and kingship mirrored those found in later religious texts. Legal codes, economic records, astronomical tables, all revealed a civilization of extraordinary depth and complexity. The idea that writing began not in Egypt or Greece, but in Mesopotamia, took hold. Scholars recognize the region as the true cradle of civilization, the first spark of organized human life. Museums around the world filled their halls with Mesopotamian treasures, some obtained through careful excavation, others through looting or colonial appropriation. Debates about ownership and ethics began to surface. But the fascination with ancient Mesopotamia only grew. Writers, artists, and historians drew inspiration from its legends. Schools taught the story of Gilgamesh. Scientists studied Babylonian math, and philosophers pondered the dawn of cities, gods, and governance. And even now, as the region faces modern challenges, as war and conflict threaten the preservation of ancient sites, the story of Mesopotamia continues to unfold. Beneath the ground, more secrets remain, sealed in clay, waiting to be read. For in this land, every grain of earth holds a memory, and every memory is a thread in the tapestry of us all. In the modern age, as satellites orbit above and digital maps stretch across the globe, Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran continues to hold a special place in humanity's collective imagination. Here, beneath desert plains and olive groves, under rivers that have shifted course with time, lie layers upon layers of human effort, aspiration, and memory. Though empires have come and gone, though languages have vanished and monuments have crumbled, the echoes of Mesopotamia still resonate. For many in the region today, these ancient ruins are more than archaeological sites. They are part of a cultural identity that stretches back thousands of years. Local communities still tell stories passed down from generation to generation. Tales of mighty kings, great floods, and gods who once walked the earth. The names of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria may now belong to history books, but their spirit lingers in the very soil. In recent decades, archaeological work has continued with renewed vigor. New technologies like satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and digital modeling have allowed researchers to uncover sites once thought lost. Aerial scans of southern Iraq have revealed vast city grids, ancient canals, roads, and fortifications hidden beneath centuries of sediment. These discoveries show not just isolated cities, but entire networks, evidence of planning, cooperation, and sustained urban life on a scale once unimaginable. Despite wars and upheaval, scholars and conservators have worked tirelessly to preserve what remains. Museums in Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra house countless artifact statues, tablets, jewelry, and tools that tell the story of everyday life in ancient times. Each item, no matter how small, is a portal to a world where writing was young, and the stars held secrets yet to be understood. Global appreciation for Mesopotamia has also grown. In classrooms, students learn that it was here that the first legal codes were written, the first cities built, the first stories told. In laboratories, scientists trace the origins of modern agriculture, tracing wheat and barley back to fields once farmed by Sumerian hands. In observatories, astronomers marvel at the precision of Babylonian stargazers who charted the heavens with remarkable accuracy without telescopes or modern math. Even in the arts, Mesopotamia finds new expression. Writers reimagine the Epic of Gilgamesh for modern audiences. Composers blend ancient scales with modern melodies. Visual artists incorporate cuneiform into contemporary designs. There's a quiet but powerful renaissance of interstone that bridges the ancient and the modern, reminding us that history is not just past, it's presence. And in this presence, there is a kind of magic. To walk among the ruins of is to step where priests once measured moonlight. To stand in Babylon is to imagine the murmur of markets and the chant of scribes. These places, though silent now, once pulsed with life. They were not just a backdrop to history, they were its beginning. As humanity grapples with its future, its climate, its technologies, its conflicts, there is wisdom to be drawn from the past. Mesopotamia teaches us that greatness can rise from the simplest things, that rivers can shape destinies, that stories, if preserved, can outlive stone. It teaches that order must balance chaos, that knowledge must serve life, and that every civilization, no matter how powerful, must one day return to the dust. Yet even in the dust, there is memory, and from memory, meaning. So long as we remember Mesopotamia, we remember ourselves. At the heart of Mesopotamia's enduring story are the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. These ancient waterways were more than just sources of water. They were sacred arteries that sustained the land, shaped its destiny, and inspired its myths. Without them, there would have been no Sumer, no Babylon, no Nineveh. Every temple, ziggurat, and city wall was born from the rich alluvial soil the rivers brought, and every field of barley or orchard of dates owed its life to the flowing currents that wound through the desert like silver veins. The Euphrates, longer and more meandering, carved a wide arc through the west, while the Tigris, faster and more temperamental, swept through the east. Together, they framed the fertile crescenta band of lush land that stood in sharp contrast to the surrounding arid zones. It was here that humanity took its first steps toward agriculture, not simply surviving, but shaping the environment to meet its needs. People learned to anticipate the river's floods, to dig canals and reservoirs, to measure and manage the ebb and flow of water like a heartbeat. In the earliest texts, the rivers were considered divine gifts. The Sumerians believed the gods themselves had crafted the canals and irrigation systems that made civilization possible. The rivers were honored in hymns and prayers, their flooding cycles watched by temple astronomers who believed they carried messages from the heavens. Every spring, as the waters swelled with snowmelt from the mountains, the fields came alive, and with them, hope for the year ahead. The engineering feats of the Mesopotamians were remarkable. They built vast networks of canal systems stretching dozens of kilometers to carry water where it was needed. Levees, sluices, and weirs were carefully managed by officials who recorded water usage on clay tablets. These were not rudimentary systems. They required coordination, long-term planning, and technical knowledge passed down over generations. Entire communities worked together to maintain these lifelines, guided by both necessity and ritual. But the rivers were not always benevolent. Their floods could be violent, unpredictable, and devastating. Cities could be drowned, crops ruined, lives lost. And in those moments, the rivers became symbols of divine anger. Myths often reflected this dual nature. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the great flood that destroys humanity is a central event echoed in later stories like Noah's Ark. These tales weren't just religious. They were memories, encoded in poetry, of disasters the people had endured. Even in later centuries, when Mesopotamia was ruled by empires from afar, the rivers remained central to daily life. Persian, Greek, Arab, and Turkish administrators all recognized their value and maintained the ancient irrigation systems. Each new ruler might bring new gods or languages, but the rivers remained the constant, threading through time like eternal witnesses. In the modern age, the Tigris and Euphrates still flow, though now constrained by dams and diverted by development. Their waters are contested, managed by national borders and international treaties. The fields they once nourished faced new challenges: climate change, salinization, urban expansion. Yet the rivers endure, just as they always have. To stand beside them today is to stand in the shadow of 10,000 years. Their banks whisper the memories of scribes and shepherds, kings and farmers. Their waters once reflected the light of torches held aloft by temple priests, and the moonlight that guided night caravans across the desert. In their flow is the sound of chants, of laughter, of hammers on stone and styluses on clay. They are more than geography. They are history, poetry, the breath of a world that gave us so much of what we are. And as long as they run, the story of Mesopotamia will never truly end. Among Mesopotamia's greatest contributions to human history is something so fundamental, so transformative, that it quietly underpins almost every aspect of our modern lives writing. It began not as literature nor as poetry, but as a practical need, a method to track grain, livestock, trade, and offerings to the gods. From these humble origins, the world's first true writing system was born: cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay tablets using a sharpened reed. Around 3200 BCE, in the Sumerian city of Uruk, early record keepers began to scratch symbols into tablets to represent commodities and numbers. Over time, these pictographs evolved into a complex system of signs, capable of expressing not just nouns, but sounds, syllables, actions, and ideas. This transformation was not immediate, it spanned generations, but gradually those angular strokes became a language not only of commerce, but of culture. Cuneiform became the medium for everything from contracts and legal decrees to hymns and royal proclamations. It was used to inscribe the myths of the gods, the deeds of kings, the prayers of priests, and the correspondence between empires. The Sumerians were the pioneers, but their writing system was adopted and adapted by later civilizations: Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Elamitzal, of whom added to its richness. Clay was the perfect medium, abundant, malleable, and durable. It preserved what ink and papyrus could not. Tablets could be dried in the sun or baked in kilns, making them resilient to time. Today, over 500,000 cuneiform tablets have survived, many of them still being translated, each one a time capsule from a world long vanished. The scribes who mastered this script were members of an elite class. Their training was long and rigorous, often beginning in boyhood. They attended edabascribal schools where they copied model texts, lists, and proverbs to develop fluency. A skilled scribe could compose contracts, perform administrative duties, write royal inscriptions, and even teach others. Their role in society was indispensable, bridging the divine and the mundane, the state and its people. Some of the most astonishing cuneiform texts are the literary and philosophical ones. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, is not only the world's oldest surviving epicid, explores questions of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning. Other tablets record debates between animals and plants, lullabies, love poems, and even humorous tales. These works offer glimpses into the minds and hearts of people who lived over 4,000 years ago. Scientific knowledge was also preserved in cuneiform. Astronomical tables, mathematical formulas, diagnostic medical texts, all written in careful wedge-shaped marks. The Babylonians, in particular, used cuneiform to track celestial events with astonishing precision. Their ability to predict eclipses and planetary movements came from centuries of careful record-keeping, all captured on tablets now housed in museums around the world. But time, as always, changed everything. As new powers rose and languages shifted, cuneiform eventually gave way to alphabetic scripts. By the end of the 1st century CE, the script had fallen into disuse. For nearly 2,000 years, it was forgotten, its symbols a mystery carved into stones and ruins. It wasn't until the 19th century that scholars finally cracked its code. Through the work of researchers like Georg Friedrich Grotefend and Sir Henry Rawlinson, cuneiform was painstakingly deciphered, most notably through trilingual inscriptions such as those found at Behistun. At last, the silence of the clay tablets was broken, and the voices of ancient Mesopotamia spoke again. Today, we write with pens, keyboards, and screens, but every word we type, every idea we record, can trace its lineage back to those first impressions in wet clay. Writing is one of the defining features of civilization, and it began between two rivers, under a Sumerian sky. In the heart of every great Mesopotamian city stood its most sacred structure, the temple. Towering above homes and markets, these sanctuaries were more than places of worship. They were the spiritual, economic, and administrative cores of urban life. Rising in tiers toward the heavens, the most iconic of these temples were called ziggurats, massive, stepped structures that sought to bridge the earthly and the divine, inviting gods to dwell among mortals. Ziggurats were not hollow temples where rituals took place inside. Instead, they served as foundations for shrines placed at their summit. Built from mud brick baked by the sun, or in kiln sand, often faced with fired brick to protect against the elements, these structures could reach staggering heights. Their design mirrored mountains, which were believed to be sacred and home to the gods. By mimicking this form, the ziggurat became a cosmic axis, a connection between earth and sky. Each city-state had its own patron deity, and the temple complex dedicated to that god was the city's spiritual anchor. In Ur, the ziggurat honored Nana, the moon god. In Babylon, the towering Etemenanke ziggurat was dedicated to Marduk, and some scholars believe it may have inspired the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. These structures were feats of engineering, requiring organized labor, detailed planning, and a strong administrative system to build and maintain. Within the temple precincts, daily rituals unfolded, Priests and priestesses bathed, dressed, and offered food to statues believed to house the essence of the gods. These ceremonies were not symbolic, they were believed to be real acts of service to divine beings. The gods, in return, were expected to bless the city with fertility, protection, and prosperity. Every festival, procession, and chant was a plea for balance between the human and the sacred. The temple staff included not only priests, but also scribes, singers, cooks, brewers, and craftsmen. Temples owned vast tracts of land, employed hundreds of workers, and managed complex economic systems. They were, in many ways, ancient corporations, spiritual but also practical institutions that managed the storage of grain, oversaw trade, and even lent silver at interest. Their archives are among the richest sources of information about everyday life in ancient Mesopotamia. The architecture of these temples reflected the Mesopotamian worldview. Each level of the ziggurat represented a tier of the cosmos, from the underworld to the celestial realm. Stairs led upward in a spiraling ascent, symbolizing the human journey toward the divine. On high holy days, rituals were held at the top platform, drawing the community's eyes and hopes upward. Yet these structures were also vulnerable. Built largely of mud brick, they required constant upkeep. Over the centuries, many ziggurats crumbled or were cannibalized for other construction. Floods, fires, and wars took their toll. Still, the memory of these sacred towers endured. In later cultures, the idea of a sacred mountain or temple as a ladder to heaven persisted, reappearing in stories, symbols, and sacred architecture around the world. Today, some ziggurats have been partially restored, most famously the Ziggurat of Uruk, which rises once again from the desert near Nasiriyah in southern Iraq. Standing before it, one can almost feel the presence of the ancients, sense the hush of early morning rituals, the scent of burning incense, the distant chant of priests echoing across stone and sky. These temples were not merely buildings, they were living expressions of belief, places where humans reached upward and gods perhaps reached down. They remind us that the spiritual impulse is ancient and universal, that long before cathedrals or mosques or stupas, people looked up at the stars and built towers of faith from the clay of the earth. In the land between two rivers, where the sun beat down upon mud brick cities and the stars gleamed over endless plains, the people of Mesopotamia lived in a world suffused with the divine. To them, the universe was not mechanical or indifferent, it was alive, vibrant, and filled with willful gods whose moods could shape fate. These deities were not abstract ideas, but powerful, often unpredictable beings who walked the earth, ruled the skies, and whispered through dreams and omens. Each city had its own patron god or goddess. In Uruk, the fierce and sensual Inanna goddess of love and war was worshipped with elaborate rituals. In Eridu, the wise water god Enki presided, lord of creation and cunning, and Lil, god of wind and authority, dwelled in Nippur, the spiritual center of the Sumerian world. And high above them all reigned Anu, the sky god, father of the divine assembly. The Mesopotamian pantheon was vast, layered, and ever-evolving, with gods adopting new roles as cultures shifted and empires rose and fell. These gods were deeply anthropomorphic, human-like in form, desire, and temperament. They quarreled, loved, punished, and forgave. They had families, courts, and rivalries. Their stories were captured in intricate myths written in cuneiform, passed down through generations of scribes and priests. These myths were more than entertainment. They were vehicles of meaning, offering explanations for the natural world, human suffering, morality, and the cycles of life and death. One of the most enduring myths is the tale of Inanna's descent into the underworld. In it, Inanna travels to the realm of her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. Stripped of her powers at each gate, Inanna is eventually slain and hung on a hook only to rise again through a series of divine bargains and sacrifices. The story echoes themes of death and rebirth, fertility and the changing seasons, resonating with rituals tied to the agricultural cycle. Another central figure in Mesopotamian mythology is Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk. His epic journey, one of the world's earliest literary masterpieces, follows his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, their adventures, Enkidu's tragic death, and Gilgamesh's desperate quest for immortality. Along the way, he encounters wise men, terrifying beasts, and even the gods themselves. In the end, Gilgamesh learns that eternal life is reserved for the gods, and that human meaning lies in legacy, love, and the works we leave behind. Creation myths also held a special place. The Enuma Elish, a Babylonian epic, tells of how the world was formed from the body of the chaos goddess Tiamat, slain by the warrior god Marduk. From her corpse, Marduk shapes the sky and sea, establishes order, and creates humanity, not as a central masterpiece, but to serve the gods, maintaining their temples and sustaining their rituals. It's a worldview shaped not by individualism, but by interdependence between humans and the divine. Divination and omens were central to everyday life. Mesopotamians read the livers of sacrificed animals, watched the flight of birds, interpreted dreams, and studied the stars for signs. No decision of importance, be it war, marriage, or harvest, was made without consulting the gods. Temples had special rooms where trained diviners and priests would perform elaborate rituals, seeking guidance from the hidden realms. The underworld, too, was a significant part of the spiritual landscape. Unlike later religious traditions that offered paradises, the Mesopotamian afterlife was a shadowy, dusty realm where souls lived on in a kind of eternal twilight. The dead were buried with goods and offerings, and their names were remembered to ensure peace in the afterlife. Forgotten spirits could become restless, prompting rituals to placate them and restore balance. These beliefs infused every aspect of life, from architecture and politics to art and ethics. Kings ruled by divine mandate, temple rituals aligned with lunar calendars, and each person's fate was seen as tied to a cosmic order shaped by unseen hands. To the people of Mesopotamia, the divine was not far away. It was all around them, in wind and flame, in river and star, in dream and destiny. Though we often focus on kings, temples, and empires, much of Mesopotamian history was lived not on thrones or battlefields, but in the homes and streets of ordinary people. These were the farmers who tilled the land, the potters who shaped clay, the scribes who copied hymns, and the parents who told stories to their children beneath starlit skies. To truly understand this ancient world, we must step into the rhythms of everyday life, where time was marked by sunrise, the flood of the river, and the changing of the seasons. Most Mesopotamians lived in modest mud brick houses, clustered along narrow alleys and near markets. The homes of the poor might consist of just a single room, while wealthier families had multi-room dwellings with inner courtyards. Roofs were flat and often used for sleeping during hot summer nights. Walls were thick to keep out the heat, and doors opened onto shared spaces, reflecting the communal nature of city life. Families formed the core of society, Marriages were often arranged and solidified through contracts, with dowries and bride prices carefully recorded. Women held a respected, though often subordinate, position within the household. They managed the home, raised children, and could own property or run businesses. Some served as priestesses or temple workers, roles that offered status and a degree of independence. Children were cherished, and education was valued particularly for boys destined to become scribes or officials. Scribes attended idubas, or tablet houses, where they copied proverbs, hymns, and legal texts under the strict supervision of teachers. These schools were demanding, but they offered a path to prestige and stability. For those not in school, early life meant helping with farming, weaving, or learning a family trade. Agriculture was the foundation of the economy. Farmers grew wheat, barley, dates, onions, garlic, and lentils, using irrigation canals that required constant maintenance. Plows were drawn by oxen, and harvests were often shared with temples or landlords as tax. In rural areas, communities worked together to maintain dikes and distribute water fairly, a task overseen by officials and enforced by law. In the cities, crafts flourished. Potters shaped vessels for storage and cooking, metal workers forged tools and ornaments, and weavers produced garments from wool. Markets were vibrant places where traders sold spices, oil, fish, beer, and textiles. Merchants traveled far and wide, exchanging goods with regions as distant as the Indus Valley and Anatolia. Trade was recorded in meticulous detail, often on clay tablets sealed with personal cylinder seals rolled across wet clay. Religion infused every aspect of life. Shrines were placed in homes, offerings made daily, and festivals celebrated with music, food, and ritual. People prayed for good harvests, protection from illness, and the favor of the gods. Misfortunes were often seen as signs of divine displeasure, prompting rituals to restore harmony. Amulets, spells, and protective charms were common, worn around the neck or hung in homes. Music and entertainment were part of daily life too. Harps, lyres, drums, and flutes were played during feasts and ceremonies. Dancers performed in temples and palaces. Storytellers recited epic tales often, accompanied by instruments passing history and myth from one generation to the next. These performances were not only enjoyed, but served as cultural glue, binding people together through shared memory and imagination. Justice and order were enforced through local councils and royal courts. Disputes over land, debt, or inheritance were settled by appointed judges. Punishments ranged from fines to physical penalties, but the emphasis was on resolution and compensation. The community mattered. Harmony among neighbors was essential in a world where survival depended on cooperation. Despite hardships, floods, droughts, disease, people endured. They loved, grieved, labored, and celebrated. They built lives filled with meaning, woven into the larger tapestry of their cities and beliefs. Their clay tablets, broken toys, cooking pots, and burial offerings tell a story that is deeply human and hauntingly familiar. In the cradle of civilization, where temples reached skyward and the stars were charted with reverent precision, the people of Mesopotamia also turned their gaze inward toward the human body, its ailments, and its mysteries. Medicine and science in ancient Mesopotamia were not separate from religion and magic. They were deeply entwined, forming a holistic system that sought to understand and heal through observation, ritual, and divine guidance. Illness was often seen as the result of supernatural forces, an angry god, a displeased ancestor, or a roaming demon. Yet within this spiritual framework, Mesopotamian healers developed remarkably systematic approaches to diagnosis and treatment. Their knowledge was recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets, some of which survive today as part of ancient libraries and temple archives. Two main types of healers served the community. The Asu was a physician in the practical sense, trained in treatments based on herbs, minerals, and surgical techniques. The Asipu, on the other hand, was a magical or spiritual healer who relied on incantations, rituals, and the interpretation of omens. In many cases, both would work together, combining physical remedies with spiritual cleansing to restore balance in the patient. Medical texts were often structured like casebooks, describing symptoms, proposed causes, and possible treatments. A tablet might read, "If a man has fever and pain in his side, and his eyes are yellow, he has liver sickness. Give him a decoction of dates, beer, and herbs." The remedies ranged from poultices and salves to enemas and bleeding. Some involved substances like garlic, mandrake, or myrrh. Others called for rituals, offerings to a deity, whispered spells, or the wearing of protective amulets. One of the most advanced fields was diagnostics. Healers paid close attention to the appearance of bodily fluids, pulse, breathing, and skin tone. They understood that different organs could be affected by specific diseases, and they carefully recorded symptoms in an attempt to predict outcomes. Prognosis was central. A healer needed to determine whether a condition was treatable or if the gods had already sealed the patient's fate. In addition to medicine, Mesopotamians made significant strides in astronomy and mathematics. The study of the stars began as a religious duty temple. Priests watched the skies to interpret omens and guide rituals, but it quickly evolved into a science. Babylonian astronomers were among the first to recognize the periodicity of celestial movements. They created detailed star charts, named constellations, and tracked the paths of the sun, moon, and visible planets. They divided the sky into 12 sections, laying the groundwork for the zodiac. They could predict lunar eclipses with surprising accuracy and recorded celestial events on tablets that now form the basis of some of the oldest astronomical archives in the world. Their observations were so precise that later Greek and Islamic scholars built upon them, preserving Mesopotamian wisdom far beyond its original borders. In mathematics, the Mesopotamians developed a base -60 system, which we still use today in measuring time and angles. They understood basic geometry, algebra, and arithmetic. Their tablet-based problem sets included calculations for area, volume, and interest rates. Schoolboys trained as scribes solved math puzzles that reveal both playfulness and precision. If a field has this area and this length, what is its width? Water management also reflected their scientific acumen. Irrigation systems required careful measurement, maintenance, and seasonal adjustment. Engineers designed canals, locks, and reservoirs with an understanding of slope, pressure, and capacity. This practical knowledge, refined over centuries, supported the agricultural abundance that fueled Mesopotamian cities. All of these achievements were guided by a worldview in which the divine and natural were inseparable. Stars were gods, herbs held hidden powers, and numbers carried sacred meaning. Yet within this sacred order, Mesopotamians developed tools of observation, experimentation, and logic. Their healers treated fevers, their astronomers mapped the heavens, and their scribes recorded it all. In the hushed corners of temples and the flickering lamplight of scriptoriums, knowledge passed from hand to hand, from clay to eternity. And though the dust now covers their voices, we still hear them in the ticking of our clocks, the gaze toward the stars, and the enduring human desire to understand and heal. Long before coins clinked in Roman pockets, or ships crossed the Mediterranean bearing silk and spice, the bustling economies of Mesopotamia set the stage for global trade. Here, in the cities between the Tigris and Euphrates, humans first developed sophisticated systems of exchange, taxation, and commerce. The economy of ancient Mesopotamia was not primitive or haphazard, was deliberate, diverse, and intricately organized. Its mechanisms echo in markets and currencies even today. At its foundation, the Mesopotamian economy was agrarian. The fertile floodplains yielded abundant harvests of barley, wheat, flax, onions, lentils, and dates. Fields were plowed by oxen, irrigated by canal systems, and harvested by hand. These fields were often owned by temples or by elite families, with workers employed seasonally. Farmers paid taxes in kind grain, livestock, or labor recorded meticulously by temple scribes. Grain was more than food. It was a currency. Surpluses were stored in temple granaries, used to feed laborers, pay debts, or support armies. Workers could be paid in daily rations. Quantities of barley, beer, and oil were the standard wage for thousands. Scribes tracked these disbursements on clay tablets, forming some of the earliest payroll and accounting records in history. Barter was common, especially in early periods. Goods were exchanged: direct textiles for tin, goats for grain. But as economies grew more complex, a silver-based accounting system emerged. Actual silver was not always exchanged. Values were measured in shekels and minas, units of weight used to assess the worth of goods and services. This allowed for more abstract transactions, debts, and long-distance trade. The Mesopotamians were expert traders. From the port cities of the Persian Gulf, they launched expeditions to faraway lands. Dilmun, modern Bahrain, served as a crucial hub, linking Mesopotamia with Magan, Oman, and Meluha, the Indus Valley. From these regions came copper, timber, ivory, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. In return, Mesopotamians exported textiles, wool, oil, grain, and crafted items such as tools and jewelry. Merchants were respected figures in society. They traveled with caravans or on riverboats, often with legal documents to secure their transactions. Contracts and promissory notes outlined deliveries, deadlines, and penalties. These documents are among the earliest examples of business law, showing a remarkable level of economic literacy. Disputes were settled in courts, with witnesses, seals, and recorded testimony. Temples were not only spiritual centers, but economic ones. They operated as banks, lending silver and grain with interest, managing trade ventures, and investing in infrastructure. They employed thousands of priests, weavers, brewers, herders, and accountants. Their archives contain contracts, inventories, and ledgers that span centuries. The temple economy was deeply intertwined with state power, reinforcing political and religious authority. Craftsmen and artisans also played a vital role. Weavers produced fine woolen garments, often dyed and embroidered. Potters shaped jars and bowls for storage and cooking. Metalworkers forged tools, weapons, and ornaments from copper, bronze, and later iron. These skilled trades were often inherited, with workshops passed from father to son. Urban neighborhoods reflected these specializations. Districts for smiths, tanners, and brewers formed the economic heart of cities. Markets, both permanent and seasonal, were spaces of interaction and vitality. Buyers and sellers gathered to negotiate prices, sell goods, and share news. Vendors sold produce, bread, spices, and beer. Traveling performers and musicians entertained the crowds. The marketplace was more than an economic space. It was a social nexus, a forum for exchange in every sense. As empires expanded, economic networks grew. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all integrated conquered territories into centralized systems of taxation and tribute. Officials were dispatched to collect resources and manage regional economies. Roads, canals, and way stations facilitated the movement of goods, messengers, and armies. Control over trade routes often determined political power. From the humblest barley field to the halls of palace treasuries, the Mesopotamian economy reflected the complexity and adaptability of its people. They built the foundations of market society, inventing the tools, contracts, measures, currency that still shape our world. In their ledgers and warehouses, in the clink of silver and rustle of grain sacks, we hear the heartbeat of a civilization constantly moving, building, and exchanging. From the moment the first city walls were raised along the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris, Mesopotamia became a land of cities. These urban centers were marvels of their time, complex, vibrant, and brimming with human energy. Each was a microcosm of civilization, a place where trade, governance, religion, and culture intertwined. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, Babylon, and Nineveh stood as titans in their age, towering in influence and scale. But just as they rose, they also declined, leaving behind ruins that whisper tales of glory and loss. The growth of cities began as early as 4000 BCE with Uruk, often called the world's first true city. With a population estimated in the tens of thousands, it was a hub of innovation. Here, cuneiform was born. Monumental temples were raised, and centralized institutions emerged. Urban planning included streets, canals, and designated spaces for workshops and markets. This model would influence city building for millennia to come. City walls served as protection from raiders and rival states, but they were also symbolic. They marked the border between the ordered world and the untamed wilds beyond. Within the walls, life followed a rhythm dictated by religious festivals, market days, and the cycles of agriculture. Ziggurats loomed over homes and shops, their step terraces visible for miles across the plains, guiding both pilgrims and merchants. Urban dwellers included a wide array of professions: priests, scribes, merchants, metalworkers, potters, soldiers, and servants. Social stratification was visible in every corner. In the size of homes, the goods traded, the titles held. Wealthy neighborhoods enjoyed access to clean water and cool courtyards, while the poor clustered in cramped quarters, vulnerable to disease and fire. Water management was crucial. Cities depended on intricate systems of canals and reservoirs, not only for agriculture, but also for daily use. Drought or neglect could spell disaster, and when the rivers flooded too severely or failed to flood at all, entire populations could be displaced. Environmental factors played a significant role in the fortunes of cities, as did overuse of land and salinization of soil caused by irrigation. War was a constant threat. City-states often fought over water rights, trade routes, or religious supremacy. Walls grew thicker, gates stronger, armies more organized. Fortified cities became both strongholds and targets. The balance of power shifted frequently, and a city's fall could be as sudden as its rise had been. Some cities, like Ur, experienced multiple cycles of growth and collapse. After reaching a golden age during the Third Dynasty of Ur, it later fell to Elamite invaders, only to be re-inhabited centuries later under new regimes. Others, like Nineveh, became imperial capitals, vast, planned, and adorned with art and gardens before being utterly destroyed by coalitions of enemies who tore down its walls stone by stone. Yet even in ruin, cities were rarely abandoned completely. Their strategic locations, fertile surroundings, and spiritual significance often brought new settlers. Layers of habitation built up over time, forming Tell's artificial mounds containing centuries of human activity. Archaeologists peel back these layers today, like pages in a vast, buried book. The final abandonment of many cities came with shifts in trade routes, political control, and climate. As newer empires, Persian, Hellenistic, Islamic, developed other centers of power, many Mesopotamian cities were left behind. Sand and silence crept into streets once filled with song and shouting. Temples crumbled, records ceased, but cities never truly die. Their names lived on in texts, their legends adapted by succeeding cultures. The idea of a city as the heart of civilization, as a place of law, worship, and creativity, was passed from Mesopotamia to the world. The urban blueprint forged here structured streets, administrative quarters. Public spaces became a model for countless cities to follow. And as modern cities now rise across the globe, glowing with light and vibrating with digital life, their roots still trace back to Mesopotamia. The lessons learned in Uruk and Babylon endure. The need for balance with nature, the risks of overreach, the power of collective life. The rise and fall of cities is not just history, it is a cycle that belongs to all of us. Though the temples of Babylon lie broken, and the libraries of Nineveh are dust, the legacy of Mesopotamia did not end with the crumbling of its cities. It traveled quietly, persistent through the veins of history. Like the rivers that shaped its destiny, Mesopotamia's cultural, intellectual, and spiritual currents flowed outward, seeping into the foundations of every civilization that followed. It became a hidden ancestor to the modern world, whispering through law, language, architecture, and belief. The most visible inheritance is the written word. Cuneiform, the earliest script, was the seed from which all later writing systems would grow. Though it eventually faded, its invention shaped the alphabetic traditions that followed. The concept of recording, of fixing thought to a medium for preservation and transmission, began in Sumer. And from that beginning sprang literature, science, history, and bureaucracy. Every book, scroll, or screen today carries within it the spirit of those first stylus marks in soft clay. Mesopotamian law codes, particularly those of Hammurabi, established principles of justice, responsibility, and state authority that deeply influenced later legal traditions. The idea that rulers should codify laws, that contracts must be honored, that justice should be administered with consistency, these were revolutionary then and foundational now. Even today, statues of Hammurabi stand in modern courthouses, a silent nod to one of history's first lawgivers. Religiously, the Mesopotamian cosmos with its pantheon of gods, myths of creation and flood, and stories of divine human interaction echoed across the ancient world. Parallels appear in Hebrew scripture, Greek mythology, and early Christian and Islamic thought. The story of a great flood, a righteous man who builds a vessel, and the survival of life itself is not unique to Noahide, appears earlier in the epic of Gilgamesh, reflecting a deeper cultural memory rooted in the unpredictable floods of the Euphrates. Mesopotamian innovations in astronomy and mathematics laid the groundwork for later scientific developments. The division of the hour into 60 minutes, the use of degrees and circles, and the tracking of celestial bodies began in temple observatories. Babylonian star charts informed Greek, Roman, Islamic, and even Renaissance astronomy. Our calendars, our clocks, and our understanding of planetary motion owe much to the quiet scribes who watched the night skies over Babylon. Art and architecture, too, bear the stamp of Mesopotamia. The step design of the ziggurat found echoes in the pyramids, the towers of medieval churches, and even modern skyscrapers. Relief carvings, cylinder seals, and statuary carried stylistic and symbolic themes that influenced Persian, Assyrian, and Hellenistic aesthetics. The monumental gateways and processional paths of Mesopotamian cities inspired urban planners for millennia. And then there is the enduring image of the city itself. Mesopotamia gave us the first urban blueprint complete with administrative centers, sacred precincts, markets, and residential districts. The notion of zoning, infrastructure, and public service stems from ancient precedents. From New York to Tokyo, every modern city carries the DNA of Uruk, Babylon, and Lagash. During the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in Baghdad and elsewhere preserved and translated ancient Mesopotamian texts. While some were lost to time, others found new life in Arabic, then Latin, and later European scholarship. The transmission of knowledge across cultures ensured that the wisdom of Mesopotamia would not vanish, it would be reborn. In museums around the world today, the artifacts of Mesopotamia draw countless visitors. Clay tablets, golden headdresses, inscribed stelas, and lion hunting reliefs transport viewers to a time when civilization first woke. And in the classrooms, books and screens where children learn of history, Mesopotamia is often the first chapter, the beginning of the great human story. Even as conflicts and tragedies threaten its heritage sites today, efforts continue to preserve, protect, and study what remains. Archaeologists, historians, artists, and citizens work to ensure that the legacy of Mesopotamia does not vanish beneath the sands. For this is not merely the story of a region, it is the story of all of us. A memory so deep it becomes a mirror, showing us where we began and perhaps where we might return. For centuries, the ruins of Mesopotamia slept beneath the earth, forgotten, buried, misremembered by passing empires and travelers. Villages and fields grew atop ancient cities, and the names of once mighty kings like Sargon, Hammurabi, and Ashurbanipal became mere echoes in ancient texts. It wasn't until the 19th century that curiosity, faith, and the emerging field of archaeology would begin to awaken this long-slumbering world, and with it, reshape our understanding of history. European travelers, many inspired by biblical accounts, began to journey to the lands of the Middle East. Some sought evidence of the Tower of Babel. Others looked for the ruins of Nineveh or the lost city of Ur. In 1843, a French consul and adventurer named Paul Émile Botta began excavations at Khorsabad, near Mosul in northern Iraq. His team unearthed vast Assyrian palace chambers lined with colossal winged bulls and walls covered in intricate reliefs of hunting and war. Soon after, Austen Henry Layard, a British archaeologist and diplomat, began his own digs at Nimrud and Nineveh. His discoveries captured the public's imagination. The palaces of kings, sculpted lions and gods, and above all, a library of Ashurbanipal. Within its chambers lay thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform, a vast archive of law, myth, science, and correspondence from an empire long vanished. Back in Europe, scholars faced the challenge of deciphering the strange wedge-shaped marks on those tablets. Using trilingual inscriptions like the Behistun inscription in modern-day Iran carved high on a cliff face by King Darius, of Persia linguists like Henry Rawlinson cracked the code of cuneiform in the mid-1800s. For the first time in over 2,000 years, the voices of Mesopotamia could be read again. This breakthrough led to a flood of translations. The Epic of Gilgamesh, once thought lost forever, was revealed, offering readers a tale older than Homer, filled with gods, heroes, and philosophical reflection. Other texts describe the Great Flood, creation stories, astronomical data, and detailed legal systems. The scale and depth of Mesopotamian civilization stunned the world. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, professional archaeological expeditions increased in number and scope. At Sir Leonard Woolley uncovered the Royal Cemetery, where golden headdresses, intricate lyres, and elaborate tombs revealed a society of immense wealth and ritual. At Lagash, Gudea statues emerged from the soil, with serene faces and inscriptions, detailing temple construction and divine dreams. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Pergamon Museum, and other institutions became homes for these finds, sparking both wonder and controversy. While they preserved and studied priceless artifacts, questions about ownership and the ethics of excavation began to grow. Many objects were removed under colonial circumstances, and today, efforts are underway to repatriate some items to Iraq and other countries of origin. The rediscovery of Mesopotamia reshaped historical narratives. No longer was civilization seen as beginning solely in Egypt or Greece. Instead, the world came to understand that long before Plato or the pyramids, there had been Sumerians etching stars into clay, Akkadian kings writing in 2 languages, and Babylonian mathematicians calculating planetary cycles with stunning precision. Today, archaeological work continues, though not without difficulty. Political instability, war, and looting have endangered sites and museums. Yet the resilience of those working to protect Mesopotamia's heritage is itself a reflection of the endurance of the culture they study. New technologies such as satellite imaging, digital mapping, and 3D reconstruction now allow for virtual excavation and preservation, even in unstable areas. The rediscovery of Mesopotamia is more than an academic triumph. It is a restoration of memory. It bridges the ancient and the modern, allowing humanity to reintroduce itself to its earliest ancestors. Their dreams, fears, and achievements no longer lie silent beneath the sand. We have found them, heard them, and in doing so, remembered something about ourselves. Long after the temples of Sumer fell silent and the rituals of Babylon faded into memory, the spiritual essence of Mesopotamia lived on, not just in broken idols or crumbling altars, but in the ideas, questions, and longings that shaped later religious and philosophical thought. The gods of Mesopotamia were eventually replaced by new names, new theologies, but the core human concerns they address, creation, death, justice, meaning, remained deeply rooted in the soil of that ancient land. In the beginning, Mesopotamian religion was an intricate dance of divine personalities. Every element of nature was alive with intent. The sun god Shamash lit the day and judged the wicked. The storm god Adad brought rain and destruction alike. The underworld goddess Ereshkigal ruled the land of the dead, while Nergal, her consort, balanced death with disease and war. There were hundreds of deities, each with temples, priests, festivals, and myths. The world was not observed from afar. It was participated in, shaped and directed by divine will. But even in these early beliefs, there were deeper reflections at play. The Epic of Gilgamesh, composed in the Bronze Age, asks the questions philosophers still ponder today. What does it mean to live well? Why do we die? Can our names outlast our bodies? In this way, Mesopotamian spirituality was not merely ceremonial, it was existential. It held space for grief, wonder, terror, and joy. As empires shifted, so too did theology. The rise of Zoroastrianism under the Persians brought a new emphasis on dualism, light versus darkness, truth versus falsehood. These ideas would influence later Abrahamic religions, and while Zoroastrianism emerged in Iran, its cosmology was shaped in part by the myths and symbols of Mesopotamia. The ancient war between Marduk and Tiamat, order against chaos, found echoes in the later battles between good and evil across many spiritual traditions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam would all emerge to the west and south of Mesopotamia, but none escaped its influence. The idea of a flood sent by divine judgment, a paradise lost, a divine order underpinning law. Even the image of a garden with rivers flowing through it, these motifs have Mesopotamian roots. The Babylonian exile of the Hebrew people in the 6th century BCE marked a profound moment of cultural exchange. Jewish prophets walked among the ruins of Babylon and likely absorbed its imagery, its rhythms, its stories. In the Islamic period, the memory of ancient Mesopotamia was refracted through philosophy and mysticism. Islamic scholars in Baghdad and Basra preserved and translated the scientific and metaphysical works of earlier civilizations, blending them with Greek and Indian thought. Though the gods of Uruk and Ur were long gone, their questions about the heavens, about fate, about divine justice remained alive in new forms. Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, sometimes echoed the inward journeys found in Gilgamesh's quest. The longing for truth, the shedding of ego, the facing of death, these themes resonated with the ancient spiritual landscape of the Tigris and Euphrates. Even as new cities rose, Baghdad, Samarra, Kufa, the old earth, beneath their foundations, whispered of older temples, older prayers. Today, some modern spiritual movements and scholars look back to Mesopotamian religion not just as myth, but as wisdom. There are attempts to reconstruct Sumerian rituals, to honor the deities of Babylon, or to explore the symbolic meanings within the Enuma Elish and other texts. Whether through academic study or spiritual revival, the religious legacy of Mesopotamia continues to inspire. And perhaps this is the greatest testament to its enduring power. Though the gods have changed, the temples turned to dust, and the rituals long ceased. The essential human yearning they sought to answer, the desire to understand our place in the universe, remains. In Mesopotamia, humanity looked to the stars and saw stories. It saw law in the rivers, fate in the storms, and hope in the sunrise. These were the first footsteps on the long road toward philosophy, theology, and introspection. And even now, when we wonder where we came from and why we are here, we follow, knowingly or not, the path first walked by those who built ziggurats beneath the sky. The treasures of ancient Mesopotamiates, tablets, temples, ziggurats, statues, and ruins are not just relics of a long-gone world. They are the physical memory of the first great civilization. Yet in our time, preserving that memory has become one of humanity's most urgent and fragile responsibilities. War, looting, neglect, and natural decay threaten to erase what has endured for over 5,000 years. And so, across Iraq and beyond, archaeologists, curators, and citizens are racing against time to safeguard the cradle of civilization. The modern region of Mesopotamia, particularly Iraq, has faced profound turmoil over the past century. While early archaeological expeditions flourished under colonial mandates and post-Ottoman openness, by the late 20th century, political instability began to hinder progress. The Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and the rise of extremist groups all took their toll on the country's rich cultural heritage. In 2003, During the US-led invasion of Iraq, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, one of the greatest repositories of Mesopotamian artifacts in the world, was looted. Thousands of items were stolen. Priceless statues, cylinder seals, tablets, and jewelry vanished into black markets and private collections. The images of broken display cases and empty hulls shocked the world. Scholars mourned not just the loss of objects, but of history, knowledge that might never be recovered. Worse still came in the 2010s, when extremist groups like ISIS occupied parts of northern Iraq and Syria. In a campaign of cultural destruction, they targeted ancient sites including Nimrud, Hatra, and parts of Nineveh. Temples were blown up, reliefs smashed, statues toppled. Some of this destruction was recorded and shared online. Acts of erasure, broadcast as a form of terror. In those moments, the world witnessed not only the loss of ancient stones, but a deliberate attempt to sever the connection between past and present. Yet even amid destruction, there has been hope. Iraqi archaeologists and museum staff have risked their lives to protect what they could. In some cases, museum workers hid artifacts or secretly relocated them. Since 2003, efforts to restore and reopen the Iraq Museum have made great strides. Thousands of artifacts have been recovered with international cooperation. Exhibits now welcome visitors, again offering a quiet triumph against oblivion. International organizations like UNESCO, along with universities and cultural institutes, have launched preservation initiatives. New excavation projects by both Iraqi and international teams continue to unearth ancient cities. Satellite imagery is used to monitor and document looting. And increasingly, technology is playing a role. 3D scanning, digital archiving, and virtual reconstructions allow scholars and the public to access Mesopotamian heritage in new ways. Local communities are also stepping into the role of guardians. In places like Nasiriyah, near the ancient city of Ur, educational programs are teaching the next generation about their heritage. Festivals and cultural events celebrate Iraq's ancient past not as something foreign or distant, but as a living part of identity. The narrative is shifting from loss to resilience, from mourning to renewal. Questions about the rightful ownership of artifacts remain. Many treasures of Mesopotamia still reside in museums far from their origin. Some argue they were saved from destruction. Others see them as colonial spoils. Debates over repatriation are ongoing, but they reflect a deeper truth. The past belongs to everyone, and it must be treated with respect, care, and humility. Preserving Mesopotamia's heritage is not just about protecting stones and statues. It is about safeguarding a shared human story. A story of invention and imagination, of rise and fall, of wonder and warning. In the broken clay tablets and the towering ruins, we find echoes of ourselves. And so we must remember not just with words, but with action. Because once forgotten, the voices of the past fall silent. But when preserved, they continue to speak, softly, patiently, across the millennia. Language is one of humanity's greatest tools for memory. It carries not only our thoughts, but our culture, identity, and imagination. Though the spoken tongues of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria have long vanished from daily use, their influence has not. The languages of ancient Mesopotamia some of the first ever written left behind a lasting imprint. In their grammar, structure, vocabulary, and especially in their stories, we find threads that run through time, from clay tablets to digital screens. The Sumerian language is a linguistic Iso-Latino known language family includes it. It emerged over 5,000 years ago and is the earliest written language on record. Though it eventually ceased to be spoken in everyday life, It continued to be studied and preserved as a scholarly and liturgical language, much like Latin in later times. The Akkadian language, by contrast, belonged to the Semitic family, making it a relative of modern Arabic and Hebrew. Akkadian became the language of diplomacy, law, literature, and administration for centuries across Mesopotamia. These languages were written in cuneiform, a script that began as pictographs and evolved into stylized wedges pressed into clay. Each sign could represent a sound, a syllable, or an entire word, depending on context. The system was complex, requiring years of training, but it was versatile and allowed for extraordinary expression. Thousands of texts survive from ancient Mesopotamia, ranging from administrative lists and royal decrees to hymns, poems, prayers, riddles, and fables. Among them, we find the Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the greatest literary achievement of the ancient world. In it, Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk, seeks immortality after the death of his friend Enkidu. Along the way, he meets sages, faces monsters, and learns that true meaning lies not in eternal life but in the legacy we leave behind. The epic's themes are universal: grief, friendship, ambition, the fear of death, the search for purpose. It's no wonder that it has been translated into dozens of languages and continues to inspire writers, filmmakers, and philosophers. Modern retellings bring Gilgamesh into contemporary settings, proving that even stories over 4,000 years old can feel strikingly present. Other literary texts also speak across time. Sumerian laments describe the fall of cities in haunting poetry. The storm took away the city. The wind carried it off like smoke. Babylonian creation myths tell of battles between order and chaos, gods crafting the world from the body of a dragon. Legal prefaces read like philosophical essays on justice and power. Even the simplest writing's a student's homework. A merchant's receipt reveals something of the human spirit: curiosity, precision, wit. Some phrases and ideas from these ancient texts found their way into later cultures. The concept of a great flood sent by gods, the idea of a paradise garden, the weighing of souls in the afterlife, all appear first in Mesopotamian sources. Later, they re-emerge in biblical Greek and Islamic writings. These parallels suggest not just influence, but a shared human narrative, adapted and retold across generations and geographies. The art of writing itself, fixing ideas in symbol swaths, one of Mesopotamia's most powerful gifts to the world. Through it, knowledge could cross space and time. With writing, humanity could build upon what came before, rather than starting over with each new generation. This continuity enabled science, law, literature, and history to flourish. Even now, modern scholars and linguists continue to study these ancient texts. Universities offer courses in Akkadian and Sumerian. Cuneiform is painstakingly transcribed and digitized, tablet by tablet. Museums create virtual archives where anyone can explore these voices from the past. And with each new discovery, we learn not only about Mesopotamia but about ourselves. Language binds us to memory, and in the memory of Mesopotamia, we hear humanity's first attempts to define the world, to shape it with words, and to leave a message for those who would one day come after. Though the cities of Mesopotamia lie in ruins, their spirit endures not just in museums or academic journals, but in the human imagination. Over the past 2 centuries, Mesopotamia has emerged from the dust, not only as a subject of scholarly fascination, but as a symbol of beginnings of mystery and of a lost wisdom that continues to captivate artists, writers, filmmakers, and dreamers across the world. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, as excavations uncovered the splendors of Babylon, Nineveh, and the public was enthralled. Newspapers reported on the discoveries with breathless excitement. Popular novels and illustrations depicted mighty kings in golden robes, winged bulls standing guard at palace gates, and stargazing priests high atop ziggurats. The exoticism of Mesopotamia, its foreignness, and its familiarity fueled a wave of creative reinterpretations. In literature, Mesopotamian themes began to surface in unexpected places. Writers drew upon ancient myths to craft modern allegories. The Epic of Gilgamesh, once unknown outside a handful of scholars, became a touchstone for poets and novelists exploring mortality, friendship, and the human condition. The tale of the Great Flood, told in cuneiform long before it appeared in biblical texts, was reimagined in countless ways, each version echoing the ancient voice of Utnapishtim. In cinema, the ruins of Mesopotamia often serve as visual metaphors for lost grandeur or ancient secrets. Films like The Exorcist open with scenes set amid the ruins of Nineveh, casting a shadow of ancient evil upon the modern world. Science fiction, too, has drawn inspiration from Mesopotamian deities and symbols suggesting that perhaps the gods of old were something more, something alien or eternal. Video games and graphic novels have followed suit. Mesopotamian imagery, cuneiform symbols, winged gods, ziggurat-like structures appear in digital landscapes, and illustrated worlds, sometimes faithful, sometimes fantastical. These representations speak to the enduring fascination with a culture that feels both distant and strangely intimate. Even in architecture and design, echoes of Mesopotamia remain. The stepped silhouette of the ziggurat has inspired buildings from Art Deco skyscrapers to modern museums. The geometric patterns found on ancient tiles and seals reappear in textiles, jewelry, and art installations. What was once buried in clay now dances in light and color across the spaces we inhabit. But perhaps most powerfully, Mesopotamia lives on in metaphor. Babylon has become a symbolist city of splendor and sin, of order and downfall. It appears in song lyrics, political speeches, and religious prophecy. Sometimes it stands for excess and corruption, sometimes for sophistication and ancient knowledge. It is a mirror, reflecting the hopes and anxieties of each new era. This imaginative afterlife is not without complexity. Mesopotamia has been romanticized, misrepresented, and even appropriated. Pseudo-archaeology and conspiracy theories sometimes co-opt its symbols, distorting its true history. But within that tangle of myth and meaning, there remains a core of wonder, a recognition that here, in this land between rivers, something essential began. And so, the legacy of Mesopotamia is not just in the tablets or the ruins, not only in the laws, the stars, or the language. It is in the stories we continue to tell. It is in the awe we feel when faced with our own beginnings. It is in the quiet realization that those ancient people, those scribes and farmers, kings and priests were, in many ways, just like us. Curious, creative, fragile, enduring. In every age, we turn back to Mesopotamia, not just to learn, but to remember, to trace our steps in the dust of history, and to find, among the crumbling walls and faded glyphs, the enduring spark of what it means to be human. As we draw near the end of our journey through ancient Mesopotamia, we are left with more than names and dates, more than myths, ruins, or artifacts. What remains is a tapestry of wisdom, an inheritance not bound to time or place. From the first cities and legal codes to poetry scratched into clay, Mesopotamia offers lessons, quiet, profound lessons for the modern world. It reminds us who we are and who we might yet become. Lesson 1. Civilization is fragile. The people of Mesopotamia were among the first to build cities, organize governments, and develop technologies. They mastered rivers, mapped the stars, and raised temples to the heavens. Yet they also faced droughts, floods, invasions, and collapse. Their stories, preserved in clay, often speak of sudden loss, of gods growing silent, of cities swallowed by sand. These are not just tales of the past, they are warnings, a reminder that even the greatest societies depend on balance, with nature, with neighbors, with ourselves. Lesson 2. Writing preserves memory. When the Sumerians began pressing marks into clay, they likely didn't know they were changing the world, but writing allowed them to transmit knowledge across generations, to record not just taxes and trade, but dreams and doubts. Through writing, they achieved a kind of immortality. Today, in a world filled with digital words, we often take this power for granted. But every letter we write, every message we send, echoes that first stylus in the hands of a young scribe, learning his signs in a tablet house. Lesson 3. Knowledge is cumulative. The Babylonians didn't invent everything from scratch. They built on what came before. They preserved Sumerian texts, improved Akkadian methods, and left a foundation for Greek, Islamic, and modern sciences. This chain of learning is humanity's most precious tradition. It reminds us that progress is not linear, or solidarity is collaborative, shared, and deeply rooted in remembering. Lesson 4. Stories matter. The Epic of Gilgamesh survives because people kept copying it, not just because of its poetry, but because it speaks to something timeless. We all search for meaning, for friendship, for ways to face loss. Mesopotamian myths are filled with flawed gods, brave mortals, and cosmic struggles not unlike the stories we still tell today. In remembering their stories, we reconnect with their emotions, their questions, and their humanity. Lesson 5. The past is not gone. Mesopotamia may seem like another world, but its spirit lingers in countless ways. In the time we keep, in the laws we follow, in the shapes of our cities, and even in the quiet awe we feel when we look up at the stars. It is not just a place on a map, it is part of who we are. Its achievements, mistakes, wonders, and warnings live on in us. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all. We are part of a story much older than ourselves. A story that began beside two rivers, where people first dared to write, to build, to pray, to dream, where they faced the vastness of the unknown and chose to leave something behind for those who would come after. Something lasting. Something true. Today, when we read their tablets, stand among their ruins, or whisper their names, we become part of that story. We carry it forward. And in doing so, we honor not only the past, but the promise that the past still holds for the future. So now we come to the end. The final steps through ancient streets once alive with voices, colors, and dreams. We've walked among the ruins of Uruk and Babylon, stood at the foot of ziggurats, read the words of scribes long turned to dust, and listened to the murmurs of rivers that still flow through the land of beginnings. And though the journey began in the past, it ends here with us quietly holding a deeper understanding of where we come from. Mesopotamia was never just a place. It was a beginning, a spark, the world's first experiment in living together in complex, ordered societies. The place where the first laws were written, where kings were crowned and questioned, where math and maps and myths were born. A place where humans reached for the divine, not just in temples, but in the very act of creating, recording, imagining. It was here that the human voice first stretched across time etched in clay, preserved against fire and flood. It was here that the sky was measured, the seasons tracked, the stars named. It was here that people asked the great questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we live? And though they answered in their own ways, their questions remain ours. They lived under suns and moons just like we do. They worried about the harvest, the health of their children, the anger of their gods. They loved, mourned, celebrated, and wondered. Their rituals may seem strange to us. Now their gods unfamiliar, their customs distant, but their hearts were not so different. They too feared being forgotten. They too hoped for something lasting, and they succeeded. For though the empires of Mesopotamia have long crumbled, their memory endures. It lives not only in museums and monuments, but in the very way we live today. In every legal code, in every city grid, in every poem that seeks to touch something eternal, there is a trace of Sumer, of Akkad, of Babylon. Their legacy is not dead, it's woven into the fabric of the present. To remember Mesopotamia is to remember ourselves at our most ancient, most ambitious, and most human. It is to look into the mirror of history and see not just ruins, but reflections. Not just lost cities, but beginnings. It is to feel that behind every calculation, every line of text, every law, and every dream, there stands a figure beneath a distant sun, pressing a stylus into clay. Let us not forget them. Let us honor their memory not only with knowledge, but with care, with the same curiosity that led them to look at the stars, to map the rivers, to build with stone and thought. Let us keep their story alive, not just as a chapter in a book, but as a whisper in the wind, as a quiet echo beneath the soil, as a reminder that from the mud of rivers, greatness can rise. And though time may pass and empires fall, the cradle of civilization still rocks gently in the memory of humankind, holding the first light of what it meant and still means to be human. And now, as our journey comes to a close, we leave behind the ziggurats and temples, the echo of cuneiform pressed into clay, the stars mapped by ancient hands. Mesopotamia may be buried beneath sand and time, but its story lives on in our words, in our cities, in the quiet wonder that stirs when we ask, where did it all begin? Thank you for spending this time with me. May your night be peaceful, your dreams deep and gentle, and may you carry with you the stillness of a world long past, yet never truly lost. Good night, and sleep well.